Welcome to our video class this evening. As you know, we did not meet last week because of the snow, so our focus will be 1 week behind. We're going to focus on developmental discipline tonight, which we would have covered last week. What we'll do to make up for the work is I'll do a little rearranging of our class notes, and if we need to, we'll extend class by a few minutes each week just to make sure that we cover all required content. And I want to remind you that next week, April 4th, your classroom management plan is due. Please email me or call if you have any questions. I'll look forward to reading those next week. And if you haven't already done so, please send me your digitized version of your instructional strategies profile. So let's begin. Tonight's agenda will focus on developmental discipline. I know it's part of your required reading. What we're going to do is we're going to highlight the key aspects, and I've done it by thinking about 4 principles, and that's what we'll go over, the 4 pieces. And I've said this a number of times. I believe very strongly that if teachers embed these 4 principles, they will have great success in their classroom management. We will also talk about some commonly used and effective strategies, which we've done before, but we'll dig in a little bit more tonight. And we do have some problem-solving vignettes that I hoped you would work on in groups. So we'll do it as well, and I'll just ask you to be reflective independently, and we can always discuss that next week when we're back together. So, what is developmental discipline? So unlike the behaviorist theory that we've talked about and ABA and in some cases, oh my gosh, I'm blanking out, PBIS, developmental discipline is an individualized approach. So it's not a formula that if you do this, this is going to happen. Just like you go to a doctor, the doctor doesn't give the same prescription for every illness. Developmental discipline doesn't implement the same strategy for every child and situation. So every time a child, what we wouldn't want to do is every time a student called out a turn, we wouldn't want to send them off to the principal's office because we haven't addressed what the issue is. Developmental discipline is based on a developmental approach, very much integrates the ideas of Piaget and Vygotsky that say that children's ability to control their behavior and understand right from wrong is actually dependent on their developmental stage, as well as their individual temperament, their abilities, and their learning profiles. A huge emphasis in developmental discipline is on prevention, understanding who your children are and redirecting them to situations so that we don't knowingly put them in situations where we know they're going to have a problem and we're going to end up reprimanding them afterwards. Another piece of the prevention is related to curriculum. And discipline and curriculum and instruction are absolutely interrelated. And this is a piece that teachers do have a lot to say about what happens in the classroom. We don't have control over what children bring to the classroom, but we have control over our curriculum and instruction. So in this chart, I've defined curriculum as the content, the information that we're providing. Curriculum is your plan for learning. So it includes your schedule, how long you stay with a particular lesson, how your transitions are managed. It also includes how you set up your physical environment, and that is critically important for how students interact within a classroom. If you are in a classroom that is cluttered and is filled with things on the wall that are really overly stimulating, charts and all kinds of information on the walls, then that can be very again, overly stimulating for certain students. So we want to really think about making sure that we have the right amount of space between to allow for easy movement in our classrooms, and that the environment is aesthetically pleasing to children. That's the curriculum. I know a lot of teachers say, well, I have no control of the curriculum. The curriculum is mandated. Yes, but you do have control over how you choose to implement that curriculum and the schedule and the physical environment. And certainly in how you deliver that instruction. So how clear you are. A lot of us think we're clear, and I have learned over the years you can never be too clear. And just because 9 out of 10 children understand what you're saying, there's always some children who don't understand it. So we have to think about how to be explicitly clear, and also think about your sequencing. Sometimes the order in which we present information can be broken down in a way that makes instruction much more successful, and certainly your interactive style with students. There are some students who are going to learn with any teacher standing in front of the classroom, and there are other students who are absolutely dependent on a really warm and respectful social interaction and relationship. So again, depends on the students, but those are the things that you have control over. So let's begin. This is Kayla, who is a second grader, and she has difficulty interacting with her classmates. Each time there's a problem, Kayla complains to her teacher that the other children are mean to her. So I ask you to reflect on, what would you do? What do you think teachers are most likely to do? So here's where I would ask for your input. But some of the responses that I typically get from participants are the teacher goes to the other children and tells them to be nice to Kayla. The teacher could decide to separate the kids because they're not getting along well together. The teacher could give the other kids a consequence or a warning. So it could be a timeout, a referral, an X on their behavior chart. The teacher could remove recess or provide lunch detention for those students who aren't behaving properly. Again, it could be an actual consequence, or it could be a warning or a threat. You're not going to be allowed to do so-and-so. The teacher could decide to call home to parents. The teacher could do nothing. Maybe the teacher is just going to say, I'm busy, Kayla, don't bother me now. I'm in the middle of guided reading. You can't interrupt me while I'm in the middle of reading. So again, that's not necessarily a bad thing on the teacher's part, but the teacher might not intervene at all. Or the teacher could encourage Kayla to go back and work it out, maybe give her some words to use, encourage Kayla to be assertive and say, I don't like how you're talking to me, or I deserve a turn. Or on a grander scale, the teacher could provide Kayla with strategies to interact more effectively with peers. So with developmental discipline, there really is no right answer here. I would say removing recess or lunch detention would definitely not be good strategies. But other than that, all those ideas that the teacher, different ways that the teacher might have responded are perfectly okay. But the teacher's only going to be successful if that strategy is absolutely geared to this particular child. So with developmental discipline, the teacher is a pseudoscientist looking to collect information about what we know about Kayla, what we know about these other children, and using that data to intervene appropriately and individually. So I really encourage you to trust your instincts and to use your observations. What you know about Kayla from past experience is going to help you make a decision about what to do in this situation. So, developmental discipline principle number one is observation, which we have talked about quite a bit in the class so far. So, the observation process looks like this. First, you observe and you ideally look objectively at what is going on. Then you interpret. What do those observations mean? Based on your knowledge of child development, based on your knowledge of this particular child. And then you assess. So you determine, why is the student acting out? Does the student only act out with this particular group, with a certain child, in a particular setting, or a particular subject area or activity? And is the student's behavior developmentally appropriate? Is it typical behavior, what we'd expect of a second grader, for example? And then we intervene. Based on what you have thoughtfully considered, you intervene and make that determination based on this particular student and situation. If a consequence is needed, that's what you do. If a conversation is needed, you do that. So this part of developmental discipline is very similar to the FBA, the Functional Behavioral Assessment, that is a part of ABA, that we've talked about. You're trying to find the function of the behavior, or in this case, the cause of the behavior. And I believe very strongly that if we focus on figuring out why the student is behaving in such a way, and as we know, there could be thousands of reasons why a student is acting out, then if we figure that out, then we're going to be able to provide the most appropriate response that will have the greatest success. That's really what we're looking for, isn't it?
Emily's teachers are frustrated that she does not follow directions. They threaten to take away recess, which seems to have little impact on her behavior.
So Emily is a first grader in a 12-1-1 K1 classroom. So 12-1-1 means that there are 12 children in the classroom with one teacher, one special ed teacher, and one aide. And it is a joint kindergarten and first grade classroom. So I ask you to think about what's going on here. If Emily's teacher took a psychic step back and examined the dynamics of her classroom and her response to Emily, she might be discovering that this is not a very good fit, what's going on here right now. The teacher is frustrated, she's threatening, and Emily is just digging in. It's not working. It's not working. And so when you discover it's not working, stop. Don't keep going in that way. So so the teacher really needs to look at, what her response is, how Emily interacts with the other children, with the environment. And this brings us to principle number 2, teacher self-reflection. This is so critically important. So I would suggest that teachers need to self-reflect on 3 areas. They need to self-reflect on the curriculum. Is the curriculum, and by curriculum, I mean the lesson of the day. So is the lesson of the day too challenging for Emily? Is the lesson too easy or boring? Is the lesson taking too long? What is that schedule like? How long have children been asked to sit there? Is it hands-on and engaging enough? So the teacher should, again, not just look at Emily and say, what's wrong with this kid? Why isn't this kid listening? She's such a difficult child. Let me, as the teacher, take a look at what I have control over. I don't have control over Emily. I have control over my curriculum. I have control over my physical environment. So maybe I have to think that maybe I look around or I listen and I find out, wow, it's just so noisy in this classroom. And for Emily, that excessive noise really sets her off. So if I have a conversation with Emily in a quieter part of the room and I'm able to create a some soft areas and maybe put up some curtains and find a way to soften the noise in the room, maybe Emily is going to be much more responsive. So I look at the environment, and I'm certainly looking at my interactive style. Maybe I just talk too loud. Maybe I need to talk softer to Emily. Maybe I need to speak slower to Emily. Maybe I need to use certain words or phrases or avoid certain words and phrases. So, the bottom line is, if you're trying something and it's not working, stop and reflect on what you're doing and what you have control over changing. So, if we return to Emily, the kinds of questions I might ask if I were the teacher is, when is Emily not compliant? Is it for all activities or just for some? Maybe it's for reading, which is particularly challenging for her, or for math, or maybe when she has to go and have speech or OT. Does Emily have a lot of difficulties during transitions? A very common time that children act out. It's the time we don't plan for. We plan our lessons, but we don't necessarily plan those in between times, between lessons. And so that's an opening for a lot of kids. Is it in the morning or afternoon? Does it have anything to do with lunch or snack time? The other thing that I would want to get more information on is having conversation with Emily's parents. Very carefully, not to blame parents, not to say, what's going on? Is anything going on at home that I should know about? That's a question that seems benign, but can really make a parent feel like the teacher is blaming the parent. But I would simply, say that, Emily is having some difficulty following directions. Does she have difficulty at home doing that? And if she doesn't, how are you successful? Can you give me some strategies that makes Emily most successful at home? I really want to learn how we can help her here, and you might have some good strategies. That's a good conversation to have with parents. Excuse me. So, and of course, the teacher is threatening no recess. I believe we talked about this before. So, what would that threat have on Emily? Recess could be the one time that she enjoys recess. So, despite who this particular child is, it's certainly not something I would want to remove for any child, unless, of course, the problem was happening at recess, and then we might have to have a little pause from activities when we're at recess. But we don't ever want to threaten to take away recess when the problem is not happening there. So, how does that warning or threat of no recess impact Emily? And as we can see, she's digging in and not complying. What I found with this particular child is just redirecting or distracting her was the best strategy. Sometimes even changing the location. Right now she's sitting at the table and doesn't want to move to the next thing, but I know that she absolutely loves a particular book, and if I say, how about we go sit in the cozy corner and read this book, often she can get away from her digging in and frustration and get redirected to something else and get out of this mood that she's in. So let's take a look at Adam. Lunchtime in schools can be challenging for some children. Adam doesn't sit for long and barely eats his food. Instead, he runs around the lunchroom and crawls under the table. Adam's teachers want him to sit and eat with the other children. So I know for some children, lunch is their favorite time of the day. For other children, it is not, and it's a very difficult time. A lot of kids, especially if they're eating in a lunchroom that is very crowded and very noisy, it can be very, very difficult for some kids. We also know that in school, there's a big emphasis on compliance, sitting quietly and listening. But Adam, that does not come easily to Adam. Sitting and being quiet is not easy. So I would say that what the teachers are trying to do, which is force him to sit and eat, is not working. And I would encourage you to have individual expectations for children, individual timelines for students' ability to sit and listen. So maybe this child needs something different from the other children. And that brings us to principle number 3, individualized intervention. So just like we have IEPs, individual education plan, we need to have IDPs, individual discipline plan. So how we respond to individual children really needs to be different. It really needs to be individualized to what they need. So I've said this before, but first of all, you want to avoid overuse of discipline strategies. If the whatever strategy you're trying, a warning, a conversation, and that strategy is not working after 1 or 2 times, switch it out. It's not going to happen. It's definitely not going to be effective the 3rd time. And those common strategies is we see a timeout in the classroom where kids are removed, or the child is sent to the principal's office, or in some cases sent home for misbehaving. And in most cases, if the child acts out again, then we know that response did not work. That strategy did not work. So I encourage you to think out of the box a little bit. So if we return to Adam, let's think about what Adam needs, not what the rest of the school needs, which is the kids need to be sitting and eating here. Maybe they're with an aide or an assistant, and the teachers take a lunch break now. But maybe, let's think about what's going on with him. So possibilities. Maybe he doesn't sit down because it's not reinforced at home. So at home, kids are allowed, the kids in Adam's family are allowed to eat, grab a bite, and then go watch TV or go play video games or go play and come back and forth. So we don't know that, and I don't want to blame this on the parent, but it would be helpful to have a little more information about what mealtime looks like in Adam's house. If that were the case, that Adam just has never learned to sit down and eat, then I would work slowly. Maybe, Adam, you're going to sit down today for 2 minutes, or Adam, tomorrow it's going to be 3 minutes. So we build up his ability to sit for longer and longer without it becoming punitive. Right now, sitting and eating is punitive. It's really something he doesn't want to do, or hasn't learned to do yet. Another possibility is that just Adam has a lot of physical energy, and the idea of sitting for a long period of time is not very helpful. So again, either we're going to provide an alternative place for Adam to go, and that is really something that I would consider, not just for Adam who has trouble sitting, or we have some activities. Maybe once you're finished eating, we have some simple games that can be played that don't involve a lot of cleanup, and or the teacher can engage the kids in a verbal game that don't involve any materials. But I will say that for many kids, this very noisy and crowded lunchroom is not healthy for them. And I think some of the best things to do is to remove certain kids from this lunch area, not as a punishment, but as providing an alternative place. This may involve the teacher being willing to have lunch with some kids, or maybe a group of teachers can rotate, or an administrator. That was something I always did as an administrator, is I gave children a chance to have lunch with me and come out of the lunchroom, and all of a sudden, sitting and having lunch in a quiet environment with just a few children, it's just incredible that you see these kids who struggle in the classroom with so many kids, and you really come to see what they're capable of. So, again, giving him an alternative, creating lunchtime enrichment clubs in your school or lunch dates. These are great alternatives. I recognize that an individual teacher may not be able to manage this herself or himself. Some of these are school-wide administrative things, but if you would be willing to allow children to eat with you, and it will go a long way. I really encourage that.
Christopher has difficulty sitting next to other children. When they get too close, he will forcefully push them away. His teachers tell him that it's not nice to push.
So, I guess the first question is are Christopher's teachers effective in dealing with the problem? I would say the answer is no, because it's an ongoing situation. He consistently has difficulty sitting with other children. So again, if we take a step back and observe, what are the triggers to Christopher's behavior? Does it only occur during free play on the floor? Is there another time of the day? Does Christopher push only certain children or all the children? Does he also push adults away? And how do the other students respond to Christopher? So there's a number of issues at play. Certainly, again, the environment could be too stressful or too demanding. Maybe it's a really tiny space. In this video, the space is not necessarily too small, but you can see the boys in the background. They really want to cooperate and play together, but Christopher doesn't. He needs more space. Maybe it is a small space, but certainly we want to take a look at that. Maybe Christopher is hypersensitive to touch. So the other kids they'll give him a little nudge, or when they're grabbing for the Legos, they touch him, and he does not like touch. So think about creating boundaries, like putting tape, masking tape on the floor is a great way to create boundaries and to say, okay, this is your space, Christopher, and this is the space where the other kids are playing. Some kids may also do better on a chair with handles that allow them to manage their space and know that this is my space. Away from the chair is not the space. Or it could be a little scatter rug, which comes from a Montessori program, that every child works on a rug, and that defines the personal space. But we also know that Christopher may just have some difficulty in a group culture. And in fact, this is a student who is on the autistic spectrum, and so engaging with other children is not his top priority. It's not what he enjoys doing, and it is indeed very difficult for him. So that brings us to principle number 4, which is building relationships and community. And this is how we can help prevent a lot of problems in our program. We talked about I mentioned earlier on that prevention is a huge piece of developmental discipline, anticipating it. If we know that if we just let Christopher and these other boys sit down and play, Christopher's going to have a problem. Well, then let's not put Christopher in that situation. Either you position yourself right there so that you can be a mediator, or you create those boundaries and those space, or divide up the material somehow so that you can prevent it from happening. So, one of the greatest things that we can do in terms of building relationships and community is to actually do social skills groups, class meetings. It is something that comes out of the early childhood model, where every morning we gather together in a circle and we talk about how we are and we discuss the plans for the day. But a social skills group is like you're turning that morning meeting up a notch. So now it's very purposeful. So now we are talking about implementing and reinforcing the rules of the classroom. Maybe it's one person talks at a time. If you have a lot of issues with kids calling out, so we're going to just practice having a rain stick or some other object, and only the person who has that rain stick in her hand gets to speak. And it helps kids to learn a little impulse control. So it's a little activity or a game, but it can help foster the one person talking at a time. We also can practice communication, facilitate communication skills. We can teach kids negotiation and compromise and develop class rules. We'll be getting into this more next week when we start talking about SEL programs and restorative justice, because those programs are built on the idea that we have a class meeting and teach skills directly. Take a listen to this little bit of a social skills group. This is that same K1 special needs class.
Last time, during Open Circle, we were looking at the traffic light and we were practicing using our words to say what our problem was. So, somebody tell me what the red means on the traffic light? Oh, excuse me, Miguel. Stop. Stop and what? Oh, not go yet. Okay, just the red means stop. And what do we do when we stop? When we have a problem, what do we do when we stop?
We have to think, come down, and then when the green light's up, then you have to go.
Okay, but I'm going to stop. We stop and we calm down. Somebody remind me how we can calm down. Okay, I'm going to read you another story. Mrs. Smith's class was running around and being noisy when they were supposed to be working quietly. Mrs. Smith is upset and feels like telling them that they must stay in for recess to finish their work. Okay, what's the problem in this story?
Because we're all not running on the classroom.
Yeah.
We're all get full.
Yes,
We
okay.
get sad.
My goodness. So the kids are running around. Wait a second, Austin. The kids are running around and they could fall and get hurt. And Austin, what did you want to add?
They'll be sad.
Well, who is sad?
The teacher.
The teacher is,
Mad.
maybe she's mad. So Austin, can you say what Mrs. Smith would say? Mrs. Smith would say, I feel
Mad.
because
The kids are running around.
the kids are running around.
So you're just getting a little taste here of a social skills group. I brought this program into this classroom because the teacher was having a lot of difficulties with behavior. Some children are in this class because they have extreme behavior difficulties, in fact IEPs for behavior. There are also many children on the autistic spectrum, and I think this is a great example of kids learning to sit in a circle, talk one at a time, and week by week, we dealt with various social skills. They're learning to identify their feelings, they're learning to calm down, and we found dramatic improvement in the classroom behavior, not just while we were together in circle, but throughout the week. So what I'd like to do now is take a look at some commonly used discipline strategies and think about how we can change what we do and not just fall into the trap of doing the same thing that teachers do that don't work. Obviously, if it works, great. If it works and has no negative effect on the children, great. But if it's not working, then I think that speaks for itself. Ms. Romano is concerned that Lisa is mean to Ashley. Lisa mocks Ashley's clothes and calls her an ugly freak. Worst of all is when Lisa convinces the other girls in class not to talk to Ashley. Whenever Ms. Romano catches Lisa saying hurtful things to Ashley, she insists that Lisa apologize to Ashley. Lisa complies with her teacher's request, but resumes the unkind behavior whenever the teacher is not looking. So, we've got a lot of things going on in this little vignette here. So, the first thing I would like to point out to you is that there really is no consequence for Lisa being consistently unkind to Ashley. In this case, I would be comfortable calling this behavior bullying. I am very reluctant to call behavior bullying because I think it's become so commonplace. A child teases another child, all of a sudden the parent is complaining, it's bullying. Every single problem between children is not bullying. Bullying, which we will talk about later in the semester, is it's a pattern, and where one individual has more power over the other. And in fact, that's what we've discovered. Even if these are two classmates the same age, clearly Lisa has some power to convince the other girls not to talk to her, and make this child feel badly. If the first time it happened, Ashley said, "Shut up and leave me alone," and really didn't care, then perhaps that bullying wouldn't be able to continue. But for whatever reason, there is an imbalance of power between Lisa and Ashley. So something really to pay attention to is how are we helping Lisa? Where is the intervention about talking about kindness? This would be a great thing if you had a classroom that had ongoing social skills groups. This would be something we would absolutely address on an ongoing basis, is how to treat people and why we treat people a certain way and how to show respect and so on. So that is not something that exists in this class. So there's no consequence for Lisa, which very much concerns me. Although some would say, well, she has to say she's sorry. I'm not sure if we've addressed this issue yet, but you hopefully have read about it in the book. Forced apologies. So adults like closure. That's one reason we want kids to apologize. We also want kids to develop good manners, absolutely. The problem is that most children are not sorry for their actions, and they did something hurtful for a reason. It was it served a purpose for them. It had a function. So by just forcing kids to say they're sorry doesn't change the function of the behavior, and the behavior continues and is reinforced. We know that when children are genuinely sorry, the apology will come spontaneously, and you can see it. You can see a sincere apology. I also want to remind you that being sorry is a feeling, and you cannot make another child feel a certain way. And certainly with our youngest children, they don't even know what it feels like. Freud would say that children cannot even experience remorse until the resolution of the Oedipal complex. That would, be much later on. Some teachers ask, well, what if I ask if Lisa wants to apologize? It's the same thing as telling her to apologize, because it serves the same purpose. The child knows, the students know that that's what you expect of them. So that doesn't do anything. I would like to introduce the idea of an apology of action, which is asking Ashley to figure out a way to make it up to her friend. But one of the ways that what we wouldn't want to do is say, go hug it out, or go shake hands, or the two of you have to sit and talk it out. If you indeed have a child who is bullied, well, that child needs protection. That child does not need to be forced to hug or touch or have a conversation with a child who's been outright cruel to her. Again, we're going to come back to bullying later in the semester, but I want you to really rethink the idea of an apology as somehow that being the consequence or the end point. It does not work.
Okay.
So this is what we're going to do.
I got crayons for everybody.
You're going to trace your name. We're just going to work in this box today. D. Good. Now you're gonna write your name. You're gonna trace these, and down here you're gonna write your name. Okay. Think of the first box.
Right, half the color.
Victoria, you're not coloring. We are gonna work on
There's no color.
You are beginning to write the rhyme.
Okay.
So maybe after you're writing, you'll have time to color.
Get a pencil. That's what we're gonna trace. What's that?
It's this one. I do nice picking up pencils. See. Oh, dropped it.
Now what you're gonna do down here is you're gonna write an A all by yourself.
This is
An A all by
this is
yourself.
what I write first.
No, like this. But you're gonna write it
Where
down
do I
here.
start?
Let's look at your paper and see. What do we always do first?
So I probably should have given you a little intro to this. This is the literacy block in this same K1 1211 classroom. So children are at different centers. Some are in guided reading, some are in a listening center. And Victoria is in the writing center. And as you can see, she is doing everything she can to avoid writing. But hopefully you notice the difference of how the aid, there's an aid, and then this is the TA. So the was really going head to head with Victoria. She's telling her, you can't do that, you have to draw, you can't draw now, you have to write. And Victoria was just not having it. Whereas the TA responded differently. And I would ask you to think about why was the TA successful in getting her to write, whereas the aid was not. And one of the things you'll see is the TA said, well, you can draw after. Let's do the writing first. And that was all this kid needed to get refocused. Well, not all. Obviously, the TA is coming over and providing a little more guidance. But she didn't say, no, you can't draw. She's saying, first you're going to write, and then you're going to draw. So just a reframing of your words, a restating of your words can make a dramatic difference and have a completely different outcome. So here is the part where we are going to break into small groups, which we obviously are not. And I would ask you, when I share the problem, what you can do is actually pause the video and think. Think about what is the problem in this scenario, what are some of the possible interventions, and how might the intervention differ if there are one or two teachers in the room. So if you're lucky enough to have an assistant, or if you're in a special needs classroom that typically has at least one assistant or an aide in the classroom. So again, you're going to problem solve individually, and if there's anything you want to discuss, please bring it to class next week. When lessons take place on the carpet area of the classroom, oftentimes there are altercations between the students. They argue about who gets the best spot and complain that the others are sitting too close. Sometimes there is shoving and hitting. So think for a moment about what the problem is, what are some possible interventions or responses, and how you would handle this. So some of the common, this is an issue. This issue is about transition and space. There's actually two things going on. So we're moving from one part of the classroom to the other. Transition. You've got to plan it. And not plan it of, oh, the quietest table gets to go first. But how about if you're wearing red shoes or red red shoelaces, or if your birthday ends in is an even number, you can go over, or something. You find creative ways to move kids from one section of the area to the other more in an organized way. You've got to plan moving them so that they don't shove, and especially there's a problem. The other issue has to do with the space. So very often there is not enough space. Or there could be enough space, but kids don't have a designated spot. So it's very, very easily fixed. If every student has a set spot, you can put maybe your rug has certain colors, or shapes, or you use masking tape and somehow create those spaces ahead of time. So once you set it ahead of time, you completely avoid this possibility. So again, reconsider your transition, how much waiting time there is, what is the system for moving from one to the other, and first of all, is that new space large enough? So a lot of times I go into classrooms and the kids are on top of each other in this very small rug area. And it's inevitable that there are going to be conflicts if the space is too small. So you might need to rearrange the space and again, provide individual spaces. When asked to begin work, Jamie says, "I'm not doing this. You always give us stupid assignments." So this vignette is about talking back. So it is a knee-jerk reaction. It is a reflex. When a child speaks in a disrespectful tone, to give it back to the kid. It's human nature. Somebody attacks you, you attack back. However, you're the adult. And if you attack back, you are not going to get anywhere with this situation. So if the teacher starts saying, "Jamie, don't talk to me that way. That is not okay to do that." Jamie's just going to dig in. And what is the goal? The goal is to get the student to do his work. So try to find composure, and you can laugh to yourself. It's a great story to tell later, but you don't want to get into a battle with this student because you may inadvertently be reinforcing his behavior. So don't let this student don't show the student that you are reacting emotionally in any way, through your tone, through your facial expression. So you simply stay calm, and I don't mean simply, that's not fair. You find a way to stay calm and redirect the student. Think about what the TA did with Victoria. Well, this is what you have to do, or she found a way to redirect, or, "Oh, Victoria, would you like to use red pencil or a green pencil?" There's as many ways to go around this. So with Jamie is, "Jamie, would it be helpful if I sat here and worked with you?" Or, "Jamie, would it be helpful if you had a study buddy to do it with?" Figure out what the reason is that he's doing it. So maybe it's too hard, maybe it's too easy. Figure out the reasons and find ways to avoid the battle. Now, I think it's okay to call Jamie on, actually, he didn't say you're stupid. I wouldn't even say you always give us stupid assignments. I would probably not even raise that issue. He didn't insult me directly. He wasn't disrespectful to me. He's disrespectful to the assignment. And I think in the scheme of things, big deal. I don't think that is necessarily something that I want to make a big deal about. If you do, it becomes a big deal. I'd rather get Jamie to do his work and find a creative way to do that. Stacy does not want to go to school. She battles with her mother from the moment she wakes up and clings to her crying at drop-off. It takes Stacy a long time to settle into the classroom routine. She frequently complains that she doesn't feel well and asks to see the nurse. Well, we may have a situation, possibly, of school phobia, school avoidance, school refusal. This is very, very common. So it's characterized by separation distress. And separation distress, if you work with young children, you know this is very common in infants and toddlers to have that difficulty. But don't assume for a minute that just because Stacy is a certain age, an elementary school student, that she should not ever have separation difficulties again. Maybe something is going, maybe there's a reason for it and she's having difficulties. Maybe there's some increased challenges or pressures or emotional challenges. Maybe she's struggling with an anxiety disorder or depression. Even young children experience anxiety and depression, and that is something we want to pay attention to. I'm not saying we know for sure that's what Stacy has. I'm saying it could be. So let's take this seriously, and certainly kids that spend a lot of time at the nurse's office who are not physically sick, there is something emotional about it. So certainly we want to figure out if something is going on at home without saying, is something going on at home? We want to inform parents that we're concerned about the difficulty and just ask, is there any suggestion, anything? You open up the doors and then parents will tell you, we're getting divorced, this is separation, somebody died in the family, somebody's moving, there's an illness. So if you really build a relationship with parents and don't make them feel defensive, they will they'll likely tell you what's going on. Be open and be supportive to parents, and you'll end up finding out what's going on at home. So there could be any number of issues at home. And you would say, well, why wouldn't the kid want to come to school if home is so bad? Well, because kids may feel guilty and worried, if I go to school, what will happen when I come home? Will somebody be gone? Will somebody have died? So we have to really take a look and find out if there is something traumatic going on with this student, whether it is anxiety, depression, trauma, or it could be a school issue. Very, very often students have school avoidance issues because there's some form of ongoing teasing or bullying going on. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. So find ways to pay more attention. And the bullying is most likely not going to happen in the middle of your class during lessons. It's going to happen at the lockers, in the bathroom, in the hallways, at recess. It's going to happen during those down times where we tend not to provide enough supervision. So do a better job. Not do a better job, but find out what's going on. Enlist the help of your colleagues to dig in and find out, is it happening during art? Is it happening on the lunch at the lunch table? Maybe the student is having learning difficulties. Maybe the student is fearful of you. Maybe you're a little critical of the student's work. Maybe the student struggles and during PE time and has poor athletic abilities and gets teased in gym class. So the bottom line is, there could be any number of reasons. This is not something to take lightly. This kind of behavior, avoidance and anxiety over being forced to go to school, can very easily turn into a long-term problem of absenteeism and school failure and dropout rates. So this is really something we want to find out what's going on with Stacy and support her, and not call her a baby and not make her feel in some way that she's to blame for the problems that are going on. When Fred is physically aggressive to his peers in class, he's sent to the ISS room, in-school suspension room. Fred's time in ISS now exceeds his time in the classroom. A big problem in schools that have ISS rooms. So it is not unusual, certainly in low-performing school districts, this concept of a place to send the kids out to is a problem. I mean, I wouldn't mind a meditation room. I wouldn't mind a chill out room or an alternative space for kids who need a quiet space, but not as a punishment and not as somehow that's a strategy for the behavior problems that you're having in the classroom, because it's not going to help. So when we send kids out of the room, whether to an ISS room or to the principal's office, it could send a couple of messages. One message is, I don't want to see you. I don't want to deal with you. Just get away from me. Or one message that you really don't want to send is, I don't have the ability to do this. So when you call for help, whether it's to a dean or an assistant principal or a social worker or the ISS room, make sure it's really a safety issue. I certainly understand that there are safety issues and there are times where you may need to call for help and have a student removed from the room, but make those few and far between. The student is a little aggressive, getting into a little altercation. I'm hoping that's something that you can manage in the classroom through prevention, through redirecting, through figuring out what is going on. Let's figure out, why is Fred physically aggressive? What is the problem? Maybe he's frustrated with his work and we can fix the problem by addressing the work. Maybe he needs more space. Whatever that, we have to rearrange the space. Another issue with sending kids out of the room, so not only it's possibly insulting the kid, I don't want to see you, I can't look at you, get away from me, or I'm inept, I can't deal with it, perhaps the principal can deal with it. A real big reason is that the child is missing valuable instructional time, a huge issue. So we have kids out of the classroom a lot, and that is just a formula for academic failure, which may be the problem why he's acting out in the first place. So we want to find a way to keep him in the classroom. Maybe you need to shadow the student who's a little aggressive. Stay physically close. If you're not tied to the front of the room, then you should be able to move around the room and position yourself near the student if need be, or only while the student is in small groups. Again, let's figure out why he's acting out. What are the contexts for that aggressive behavior? Maybe we can switch up the lesson. Maybe the lesson is too long. If we observe Fred and figure out when he's likely to act out, and then we can rehearse and preview those expectations with him. So again, I feel very strongly that a lot of the behavior problems can be dramatically reduced if you observe and reflect on what can be changed, and you individualize what Fred gets, and you build preventative strategies and build relationships, and I think you're going to have greater success, and Fred won't need to be out of the room and lose instructional time. During free time, Diamond and Cheryl are working on a skit for a show. When Amanda asks to join them, they say that they've just finished the skit. They walk away whispering to each other, leaving Amanda by herself. So this is a little different from that first vignette or the vignette with Lisa and Ashley, where Lisa was downright mean and hurtful and encouraging the other kids to be mean to the child too. It's a little different. This is exclusion. So the Diamond and Cheryl weren't mean per se to Amanda. They just didn't want Amanda to be part of it. So this is huge. A child's self-image can be completely determined or defined by his membership to a group. And it can't make kids be kind to each other, but I think there's a lot of things we can do to talk about. This is a topic that I would absolutely talk about in my social skills group. Let's talk about inclusion and exclusion. One of the things that you might want to consider is what is the reason for it? Very often, kids are excluded because of their gender or a physical attribute, if they're particularly tall or if they're heavy, or they look a certain way. It could be a disability per se, but they could be excluded by a physical reason. Girls tend to be more exclusive than boys. So boys are most likely, not all the time. I don't want to make any gender generalizations about gender, but there has been a bit of research that found that this kind of exclusion is very, very common with girls. So again, the class discussion, maybe we have to have rules for play. So maybe in this classroom, there's no such thing as you can't join in. Maybe, I mean, that's up to you. Maybe you don't want to force kids to have to play with each other, but you might. So we also know that the dynamics between 3 kids, in particular 3 girls, sorry for the gender typing again, we know that is a particularly difficult dynamic. So sometimes a 2-person friendship, they don't want to include a third, and sometimes that changes. So there's an intensity about the friendship. There's a worry about the boundaries, and so on. Again, it goes back to social cues and teaching not only Diamond and Cheryl to think about ways that they can include other children. And I'm not sure I would talk to Diamond and Cheryl per se, because it's not even clear to me that they necessarily did anything wrong. It would be something I would address as the whole class about how it feels to be included and excluded. But a huge piece is building up Amanda's social skills. So if Diamond and Cheryl didn't necessarily do anything wrong, what can Amanda do to be more assertive, to read social cues better, learn how to enter a group, how to be resilient? These are skills that we can teach Amanda. It's not only about correcting the other kids, it's about helping Amanda figure out what she can do when she's faced with such a situation. And that would go very, very far if we can empower Amanda and build on her self-confidence and resilience. The teacher has promised the students an ice cream party when the class has earned 25 stars. The party will take place this Friday, but James will not be able to participate because he has consistently engaged in inappropriate behavior. Well, we have already spoken about rewards and punishments. I don't need to continue this other than to remind you that group rewards are particularly ineffective. And the other problem I have in this vignette is with food being used as a reinforcer. You want to have an ice cream party, then have an ice cream party with your kids, and it shouldn't be contingent on their behavior. Food is definitely to be shared with everybody. It's just something we don't want to play around with and use that as a contingent for good behavior. And of course, here's a great example. This is a great example of why rewards, don't work. Because if James was already out of the party is not until Friday. But what if James's behavior was bad on Monday? So what is supposedly going to motivate him to behave well for the rest of the week? It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. As we've spoken about before, if we want to facilitate internal motivation to behave properly, you build relationships. Build a relationship with James. And we know that engaging and rigorous learning experiences also can help build James's ability to behave well in the classroom. Tilly goes to her teachers several times a day to report about her classmates. She tells on them when her friends don't finish their seat work or clean up, or when they leave the room without permission. Her classmates complain that Tilly is a tattletale. So, why do children tattle on their friends? For some, it's to get attention, or a teacher's approval. So the problem is that the teacher will end up reinforcing this behavior, because if Tilly comes to the teacher and then the teacher acts on what Tilly just said, then Tilly is getting reinforced. Look at that, I'm like the teacher assistant here. So she's going to keep doing that. And teachers may kind of like having Tilly, who's always following the rules, and Tilly's a second eye in the classroom. You're trying to work with a group in guided reading, and Tilly's out there keeping an eye on the kids. That is something you really don't want to get in the habit of. You don't want to reinforce this tattling behavior, and nor do you want to use a child in that realm. Children also tattle maybe because they're jealous. So maybe Tilly is specifically tattling on kids who she's had issues with. Maybe it gives Tilly a little pleasure to see kids get in trouble or get reprimanded in some way. Or, as I said, jealousy, or to get back at the other kids for some reason. Maybe it makes Tilly feel good. I do the right thing. I'm well behaved. It just makes her feel a little superior. Now, it's also possible that Tilly has a more mature sense of right and wrong. Maybe and that is entirely possible, that she has a very well-developed sense, and so she sees a wrongdoing, and she wants to correct that wrongdoing. We also know that Tilly, or a tattler, may just be more connected with adults than peers. So the student feels it's their responsibility. So some of the consequences of a child tattling is peer disapproval. The child is now may likely be excluded or ostracized. So Tilly goes to play with other kids, and they're like, "Get away! You're a tattletale. We don't want to play with you." Or they tease her, they make fun of her, call her a tattletale. So that is definitely not a situation I want in the room. The teacher who might respond by, correcting or reprimanding the kids that Tilly has tattled on, that's a possibility. The other is that the teacher could be annoyed. It can be really annoying if a kid is constantly coming up to you. The best thing to do would be to say, "Tilly, what are you supposed to be doing now?" You're supposed to be over in the research center. Tilly, I'm going to suggest you go back to the research center. So not in any way respond. Now, what if Tilly tells you something dangerous is going on? Again, I'd say, Tilly, please go back and focus on what you have to do. Don't reinforce that in any way. And then you go and catch that behavior. So we don't want it in any way to be the cause of Tilly's tattletaling, because again, it'll keep happening. When students are not completing their work in a timely fashion, the teacher tells the students that they will have to finish it for homework. It's a problem. So I guess the teacher's goal is to get the kids to do their work, or maybe it's, maybe it'll be an avoidance. Then if I'll end up having to do it for homework, so I'll work better, I'll pay more attention, I'll do it now. Or the teacher may really indeed see this as a consequence. Well, if you didn't do your work during the day, you've got to do it at night. Or the teacher may just really believe that homework is that classwork is so valuable that it's got to get done one way or another. But I think you want to figure out, why is the student not getting the work done? That's the question. It's not just about giving them the work to do. Alfie Kahn said, if the students are off task, ask yourself, what is the task? So maybe the work is not engaging, or maybe the work is too hard or too easy. So let's take a look at what that work is if a student is having difficulty. Maybe the student just has too many distractions in class. So what we have to do is find a more private area for the student to work. So again, it's the physical environment that you have control over. Or the student is just slow. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Everyone works at a different pace. So the student works slowly. So if that's the case, then the student's going to work slowly at night too. And it worries me very, very much. And we've talked about homework, is about students being assigned too much homework at night. I also want you to think twice about using work as punishment. Work should be important and valuable and going to help the student, not a punishment. And most certainly, you don't want to ever have writing as a punishment. Sometimes, maybe that work during the day is writing, and the student is not a strong writer, doesn't like writing, isn't interested in writing. And then, so if we make writing a punishment, that's certainly not going to encourage the student to work harder or to be a better writer. Maybe the student needs support in writing. So, as we finish up for the evening, I encourage you to bring your questions and comments about these vignettes to class next week. We're going to focus on social emotional learning next week. And again, your assignment is due. And I look forward to seeing you in class. Please reach out to me if you have any questions, and have a fabulous week.